Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Alright, we're talking about entertainment here, but only because I think that there's an object lesson that can be gleaned from some of this. So what's the story here? T.I. Harris and his family were at a Falcons game, in the Skybox no less. They were live streaming this family outing, and no, I'm not going to be showing the video because it was an embarrassment to watch. For those of you who don't know, the upshot is that T.I.'s son, King, who he had by a white woman, apparently was feeling that he wasn't being taken seriously, so instead of watching the game, he wanted to try to get some street cred in the Skybox at a football game. There may or may not have been alcohol involved. Okay, so he began yelling and arguing with someone that he didn't have a silver spoon in his mouth just because he was a rich kid. He said that he lived in the hood because he had lived with his grandmother, and that was when the mother came on camera and said that the boy lived with his grandmother because he had been sucking a pacifier until he was age 12. On a side note, if you got a child who has a case of arrested development, aren't the parents supposed to step in to stop that kind of behavior? Anyway, his mother humiliated him, and the young man got indignant and loud, and T.I. apparently had to literally shake him to get him to calm down. They got into a physical altercation. I don't think any blows were struck, but still. This is the result of a young man from a well-to-do background who simply can't reconcile how the family makes their money with how he's supposed to be moving. Dad made his money as a gangster rapper. And the son apparently wants to prove that he's up to snuff as far as Dad's concerned, because at the very least his father's taken seriously. This is the problem of a child needing to grow up in a different shadow from his father. Even Ice Cube, who has made a disgrace of himself recently, he didn't have this kind of problem. His son has been trying to make it in Hollywood, just like Cube has been making those low-budget straight-to-video flicks. But then again, Cube's father made a lane for his son. No shade to T.I. necessarily, but this is the result of the young man not having it drilled into his head what his lane is supposed to be. He goes to school, hangs out with friends, and the shadow of his father's profession follows him there. Dad raps about the streets, and here his son is, a suburban kid. Why isn't that good enough for him? Because the father reflects on the child. And Dad's rapping about the streets, people will see his son living the opposite and give him a hard time about it. His street guy persona comes off as fake and phony like those white suburban kids who try to act like they came from the hood. Why do they do that? It's because they all want to be taken seriously. The street dudes they see from the black areas of town are taken seriously simply because of how they carry themselves, who they are, and what people know that they will do. That's because they're living the street life, and that being the case, every day's a new battle, and you better be ready for it. But these white suburbanites, they see these guys as being connected to real life. Yes, they're also connected to real deaths, too. But they don't care. These white suburbanites are wondering how do they get people to take them seriously like that. So they imitate these other people, which is just as well because it's either that or commit a mass shooting. But that's where this is coming from. The children of celebrities usually have big problems trying to find their identity. They don't really exist themselves. Whenever people talk about them, they get referred to as so-and-so's son or the child of such-and-such celebrity. They only exist as an extension of their famous parent. Their parent is who defines the entire family. But what happens when the parent's way of making money or the surroundings they gave their children directly clashes with the path that the child is supposed to take in life? If this young man was being groomed to take control of the family business, not rapping in this case, but whatever other income sources T.I. and his wife have been developing, then I don't think we'd be seeing this from him at all. And this isn't the first time that he's been in the news for getting loud and rowdy. Apparently, he actually threatened some worker at the Waffle House, something about a pickle being missing from his order. You know, it's a very weak individual who every time you look up, they're constantly talking about how they're having arguments with people and they went to this or that business and they didn't get this right. It's weak people who look for opportunities to try to flex at the local Waffle House or what have you. But again, this has all been happening under his parents' nose. They've known about it. Why hasn't anyone pulled his coat before now? Personally, I think the parents are as complicit in his outburst as he is. This child was allowed to grow into this behavior. And the mother stepping in to clown him on camera, that came off as an immature relationship with her own child. She was treating him like a teenager teasing one of her peers, instead of a mother looking to correct her child. You can tell his parents raised him more like they were his friends than that they were his parents. And I understand full well that a lot of us were raised by abusive parents, people who mistreated us. That being the case, a lot of people overcompensate when it comes to raising their own children. They react by deciding that since mom or dad or both were so hard on them growing up, they would do the opposite. They wouldn't be so hard on the kid. That's an overcorrection, and we need to understand that. But also, when he started deciding to get loud or whatever, the cameras should have gone off. This culture of living our lives through TikTok and Instagram videos, every minute of everyone's life has to be posted online regardless, that has to stop. And as far as the mother holding the young man up for ridicule on a live stream, why didn't they just cut off the video when he was acting up? Why make a show out of it? The child reflects poorly on the father as proof that he doesn't respect them, but the parents can also reflect poorly on the child as having set a poor example. Looking at the multicolored dreads and how this young man's dressed and talking and how he tries to come off as a thug, he's cosplaying, but he was allowed to grow into that behavior. Though I'm sure that we can all agree on one thing. Considering the opportunities that this young man was born with, and the fact that he's got resources that the vast majority of black people can only dream of, it's a disgrace what he's doing. Every generation of black children has to start from zero. This is why poverty is generational among our people. When parents don't focus on leaving an inheritance to their kids, their children have to start from scratch, and that becomes harder and harder in a world where the competition is only becoming more fierce. But there's also another factor that works against generational wealth. This is from the son's point of view. You probably heard the old saying about the first generation starts the business and the third generation closes it. That's because the first generation knows what it means to have to claw a future out of the cold, dead earth. That first generation doesn't want their children to have to go through the same things, though, because it was traumatic. Frankly, most of the time, the parents were merely trying to survive. So they try to make sure that their children have a cushier life than they did. That can become a problem when the child is not exposed to the real world. The child needs to have hardships in their life so that they can understand that the world is not an amusement park. Of course, nobody wants the child to grow up with emotional scars from having to claw their way out of poverty, but if that child does not understand how tough life can be, they're going to fall into poverty because they were coddled and pampered. That being the case, the child needs to be carrying those hard experiences from the lessons they learned, having to make a better life for themselves, as opposed to living the rest of their lives broke because they didn't realize what the money meant in the first place. It must be impressed upon a child how important it is to learn the family business and to protect it. While the parents can do their most to impress that upon the child, it's harder to do that with grandkids who are usually trust fund babies at this point. Having never had to work, all they know is how to spend money. They were never made to have to learn how to run the business or to grow it. No one took the time to teach them that the business is the only thing sustaining the family, and that if they blow it, the family goes right back to zero again. So the trust fund grandchildren usually wind up running the family business into the ground. What are they preparing this young man for? Judging by how he talks, dresses, and acts in public? Apparently not much. You know, this reminds me of Ja Morant. He's so desperate to be a gangster, but gangsters don't have multi-million-dollar NBA contracts or endorsement deals. It's so sad to see young black people, especially young black men who make it out of the ghetto, and for some strange reason, they want to go back. It's not merely ignorance on the young man's part, it's also a character flaw. I can't help but think of the movie The Godfather. Michael wasn't the heir apparent to his father's mafia crown. The elder brother, Sonny, played by James Caan, was. He was supposed to be their father's successor. In fact, Sonny made it a point to tease his younger brother Michael because Michael went to college and later the Marines, while Sonny spent his time being a playboy and a tough guy and taking care of the business. But Michael was the one who ultimately became Godfather because Sonny thought he was bulletproof and got himself killed. Meanwhile, Michael never lost his cool. He sized people up, looked for opportunities everywhere, and whenever he struck, he made sure to wipe out all the family's enemies. Going legit isn't easy. To make the transition from organized crime to organized corporation takes skill, patience, and observation. Traits that Sonny didn't have, but Michael did. Yes, survival is about being tough, but it's more about being intelligent and shrewd. These gangster rappers have to make a choice at some point. You can choose to be a businessman or a street dude, but you can't be both. Suge Knight tried. His first stint in prison apparently wasn't enough to get the lesson across that he needed to change. Then he lost Death Row Records and still didn't get the lesson. I remember reading back in the day when he was doing time in Utah or Oregon or wherever he was in stir at, he was actually threatening Snoop Dogg, saying that when he got out of prison, he had all kinds of scores to settle. When you're young and you think you can afford to spend a few years in a cell, that kind of egomaniacal behavior may seem cute, But at some point, you're supposed to realize that you're wasting years you can't get back, and the worst way to spend your life is in a cage. But apparently he thought it was worth it, so he killed a man and now he's serving a 28-year sentence. 7 years down, only 21 more to go, though he does become eligible for parole in 2034. But Suge Knight is 58 years old now. He's lost a decade of his life in prison, and it's not like he had any big business ventures going on the outside. What will he have when he gets out? A punked-out senior citizen ex-con with no prospects. You know, he collapsed in court when the judge hit him with that $25 million bail, and he was crying at sentencing. I can't really blame him. To have one's entire life blown away in an instant, the older you get, the less cute being in prison becomes. I wonder if anyone's ever impressed this upon King, that if he wants to be a street dude, this is where he winds up. He thinks he's not being respected now, let him have to eat a 28-year sentence. See if anybody respects him then. But that's what happens when you decide you're not going to cut ties with the street life. Dr. Dre saw the writing on the wall, so did Ice Cube and Snoop. That's why they're rich and free to this day and planning what white media figures behinds they want to kiss this week. But I suppose that does beat spending your golden years taking prison showers with a bunch of other dudes and staring at the same four walls every day while wondering what, if anything, you'll do supposing you get out. This incident with T.I. also reminds me of a number of black celebrity fathers, sadly. 50 Cent's another case. His son was trying to imply that he was a deadbeat dad, not because he didn't pay child support, but because the son said that it wasn't enough. Apparently $6,700 a month isn't enough for child support. This young man is 25 years old, by the way, and saying that he wants his father to pay child support. Talk about failure to launch. 50 didn't have custody of the boy, but whomever the woman was who did have custody, I guess he figured he would support them for life. This was a case that should never have become public, but the son chose to do that. And for what? When a black man comes up in the world and actually has a couple of nickels to rub together, where children are concerned, he has to hold the reins tighter, not looser. Just take a look at Dwayne Wade. He's got his son out there just doing whatever. And as for Will Smith, his son is basically a circus freak at this point. Things are so janky over at the Smith household, it's not even funny. Black celebrity fathers have been taking a lot of body blows lately. We won't even discuss the mess with John Amos and his daughter. Trying to raise children is hard. Raising them with the intent that they walk a different path in life than you did is harder. But to do it under the constant lights of the media is harder still. We live in a sad age. You got a bunch of attention whoring going on, people trying to be Instagram famous, and other folks trying to be things they aren't. Now this young man feels clearly that he's not being respected, and he's right. He's a kid. If he wants to get respect, then he should try actually building something first. But it's far easier to yell and shout about how street you are and telling people to test your gangsta. The point of gangster rap, for those who are not exploiting it, is that you're talking about the harsh and recidivist realities of the street, along with the struggles that go with it. But ultimately, the goal is to climb out of that. You want to get your piece of the world so you don't have to be out in the streets. That's supposed to be the point. Some people, though, have taken a fact of life and are trying to make it into a way of life. But there's no life in the streets, only an early death. Now, while there's certainly plenty of blame to go around, ultimately it rests on the shoulders of King. His big issue is he hasn't accepted himself. See, this is the problem with our having allowed the white media to make the definition of black and hood synonymous. You can't be black without the hood, the white media teaches, but that's not true at all. We have been robbed of the ability to define ourselves, but we've also played along with a dangerous definition of blackness that doesn't serve our power. And some of the gangster rappers need to take a look at how they've played a part in all this. What you see this young man doing is an example of that shameful confluence of factors. A young man living in the shadow of his father, living a lifestyle that's the opposite of what his father portrays, and wanting to be taken seriously. As a parent, you can't afford to blur the line between reality and fantasy. Children need a stern upbringing, especially if you intend to give them a multi-million-dollar inheritance. Their lives should revolve around that, how to grow the family fortune. Once your family has the bag, you gotta make sure you don't drop it. The Harris family needs to do a real gut check about how they've raised that young man, and he has a lot of learning to do himself. Though I gotta tell you, he's off to a slow start. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Shabazz, Gwendolyn Langston, Envision That, Lawrence Shaver, and Joshua Daniels. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.